Good afternoon. Jim here again, All Power Group and Phoenix Animals. You know, I promised you that I'd be from this morning if you were able to watch my animal-related presentation about, unfortunately, animals in all the hurricanes we've had, Helene and Milton. And as much as, yes, people are suffering, have suffered, will suffer, but we also have to think of the animals, because we really need to help them. But anyway, I'm doing some flashbacks in my life, which might be interesting, and I hope that going back through memory lane, this might kind of bring it all together as to how far we've come in the sense of technology. Yesterday, I discussed in the afternoon about the beginning computers that I used, the first one being the Atari 800. Well, at the same time we were progressing with computers, we were also progressing with telecommunications. Now, what you're seeing, and I know a lot of this is, some of you will say, yeah, I know this. Or some will say, what the heck are you talking about? But anyway, I was always like, oh, I want the next best thing and I want the next fastest thing. I mean, that's been the story of my life. But starting right off, the first modem, and that was where you can communicate from point A to point B, and the original first connections where you would actually literally, as you see, you dial a number and you had to do one number at a time, and the connection, as you see, the receiver on the phone is connected into the the device that would allow you to do that. I know it looks a little rinky-dink, and I'll show you the next one. That's just another one. And, it's like with anything, it worked okay. Now, I really started right after this, and what we started out with, now, we've got what we call baud rates, and that's bits per second. And 300 might sound like a lot, and that was kind of the beginning connection we had. You would go, wow, 300 baud. That is unbelievable. And I also mentioned that my aha moment back then was when I connected to a service with a 300 baud modem. That's the first one I worked with. And I connected to a company called The Source. And it was just all text. Could you see a lot? Could you get a lot? Did you get a lot of information? Well, more than you ever did before, because you could never connect before. But I remember when that first, what we call handshaking, happened, and I connected. You hear where two different modems are saying, okay, I'm going to work together. I was absolutely amazed as I would look at my green screen monitor. Green, writing, or I mentioned yesterday, Amber. And I'm saying, I'm actually connected to another computer in the Washington area. And again, the company's name was The Source. So, talking about going back to modems, but that was just unbelievable. And from that point, I was hooked. I'm like, I want to connect. And as you see, as I progress with the modems that we had after that, it was like, yeah, Got to have the next speed, next speed, next speed. So the early modems from the 1960s and 1970s were, this approximately 300 baud, which again, by today's standard, is caveman times. But again, we didn't have anything else. It was one of the very first non-telephone devices to connect directly to a telephone line. And this is, I didn't know this, a practice which didn't become legal until 1978. Modems had existed long before it, but were acoustically coupled to the telephones instead of being connected directly to the line. And again, that's when I kind of started, where you had, where your phone line through a modem, not with the coupling need, would basically connect. And as I mentioned, I was connecting to a service called The Source. Later, CompuServe came around, and I used that a lot of times. And then later, AOL. Remember, if you remember from back then, or you were there back then, you would keep getting maybe 3 times a week an AOL disc, so that you could sign up for AOL and connect. And I do admit that they had some pretty good services, at the time. But now talking a little bit about CompuServe. CompuServe is a notable early internet service provider, parentheses, ISP, that was founded in 1969. That's the year I graduated from high school. It offered online services such as email, online forums, and file downloading to its subscribers. Now, I learned a lot about computers over time, and part of it was going on the forums, computer forums. And again, everything was slow and everything was text, but I learned so much by just reading other people's problems. And, you go on a forum and we have forums today, Reddit, Twitch, et cetera, et cetera. And I would read the problem. This is probably a hard way to learn, but if you're doing it enough, one after the other, I would read the problem, and obviously on a forum, you're going to get quite a few different answers. Some are good, some are not so good. But that's how I learned. Somebody had a problem, this is how they fixed it. And a second person, this is how I fixed it. So it really helped me learn a lot. Now, one thing I want to say before I forget is, and now I'll come back when I mention one other thing, so I'm saying it kind of in logical sequence. CompuServe was one of the first commercial ISPs providing access to ARPANET, the precursor to the modern day internet. Now, I remember, because we were saying, what's the WWW, World Wide Web? And I would try, as we progressed and things started getting a little bit better, I would try, because it was new, to go out to ARPANET and then the internet, and sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. And there wasn't anything where you'd say, well, I know why it's not working, or I know why it's working. It's just some good days, bad days. So, you know, in the 1980s and 1990s, CompuServe was a major player in the internet landscape, especially for users without direct access to the internet. So yes, we would connect to CompuServe, and then later AOL, and mainly CompuServe, and you would type www, which was supposed to feed you out to the World Wide Web. And again, sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. The company shut down its consumer services in 2001, and some of this issues I didn't even know they would be going this long, to be honest with you. And then that's why when I do the homeworks on these presentations, I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. So, you know, we're learning together, and that's what's kind of neat. You're looking at, this is an actual, and I did Atari computer was my very first, Atari 800 was my very first computer. And that's just showing a device they had with the coupling capability, which later came where you'd have a direct connection with your phone line. And it was just like having a fax line. If you wanted to make sure you could make calls at the same time you're on the internet, you couldn't do it. So you'd have to have a separate phone line. So we did. And we'd use that second phone line for connecting and also for sending faxes. Even though it shut down in 2001, its legacy as a pioneer ISP remains. And yes, man, we really, really enjoyed what we could do back then. Now, what you're looking at, and boy, I'll tell you, I had actually forgotten the name, but this is a company called Hayes, Hayes. And as the telecommunication speed increased, I hate to say, you'd end up buying another modem. But anyway, the Hayes compatible, it predates the AT command set, which made Hayes famous. I mean, they were good modems, but it didn't come out until a couple of years later. Although it has an internal coupler module, it is considered an internal modem, and it consists of a internal card and external module with a dedicated interface between the two. But a proper external modem could be connected to a standard RS-232 interface. Now, we had, that was what we call a serial interface, and then we also had a parallel interface. And it's a little bit off topic, but on the parallel side, that's how back then we would connect our printers. So you had serial, and then you had, the connection, what we call parallel, for the printers. Anyway, the integrated circuits were the same as what we call integrated circuits today. I'm sorry, they were not the same, which technically are monolithic integrated circuits. You won't be tested on this. It could only dial pulse like a rotary phone. It does not support touch tone because we didn't have touch tone. We used to have a phone just that you would dial and you'd hear so it would dial, and it was actually not really touch tone. It also dials pulses each digit as you type the number, which takes almost 1 second per digit, depending on which digit you were using. 1 pulse for 1, 9 pulses for 9, 10 for 0. Unlike later modems, which dial the entire number, wow, that was really moving forward. You type the whole sequence and press return. Now, the next step up, And I'll try to go through these relatively quickly because, they were mainly, again, the Hayes modem, but they kept improving the speeds. And as I mentioned, my tendency back then was I always needed to get the next fastest modem. So the next one was 1200 baud. And that was in the early 1980s, a notable upgrade for modems used by the early computer systems. Then we went to 2400 baud, a popular speed for home users. And then we went to 4800 baud, which was less common but available as an intermediate step in the late 1980s. And I know you're probably saying, boy, you spent a fortune on modems. And it wouldn't be where you'd say, wow, I'm going from going 10 miles an hour to going 100 miles an hour. Each one was a progression of speed forward, but not where you'd go, whoa, boy, have I hit gold dust. But anyway, the 9600 baud modem was in the late 1980s a significant improvement and widely adopted by businesses. Now, we also have, and again, I know you won't be tested on this because they did a lot of these. So next we moved into the 14.4K baud. So that would be 14,400 BPS in the early 1990s. The popular in both businesses and home setting. And then we went to the 28.8 baud, 28,800 BPS. And in the mid-1990s, a major step up for the home internet access. Now, what you're seeing here, this is Matthew Broderick, and this is a movie called, War Games. And it was where he had a little home computer, and he, unbelievably, which, you would have a hard time connecting back then anyway, but he connected to a military modem, and he didn't know it, but he was actually in real war games of what looked like we were being attacked from all, and I guess probably Russia back then. Could even be Russia today, but he was thinking it was just a game, and actually it was a real war game practice. And you could see the screens where it looked like, oh my heavens, look at all the missiles that are coming into the United States. So it really, really scared people, and luckily it wasn't real. It was good. I watched this many times. Then we move into the 33.6 baud modem in the mid-1990s, another improvement in dial-up speeds. Then we got to 56K baud in the late 1990s, and this was, and of course I got it as soon as I could, this was the fastest speed achievable over standard phone lines using dial-up modems. And it was version 90 and version 0.92 standards. Now, and again, I got to be honest, some, things you do and things at the time you're saying, oh, I just have to have more speed, I got to have more speed. I signed up for a service that was called Direct PC, not Direct TV. And what it was, and I got to admit, it was kind of rinky-dink, but I would have a a satellite dish that was direct PC, and it would combine dial-up at that 56 BPS and a satellite connection. So in other words, you would send up via your modem a request to wherever you want to go. Let's say I did online banking. That was way back then. But what it would do is, the modem would send up the request for where, let's say you want to go to the bank, and it would send the actual signal back down, supposedly at much faster speeds, to the satellite dish. And then it would come in, and you'd say, wow. But I remember back then, it was where so many times I would keep losing connection. I'd have to redo it. I have to reinstall. I mean, it was really, really a pain in the you-know-what. But that was the best we had. And after that, they came out with what they call ISDN lines, which were either 64 kps to 120 kps. Now, remember, the lesser was 56. So the ISDN lines, and those were not generally used for home users, even though I tried to go that way. Because again, it was almost like a drug. The drug is great, and when the drug wears off, you go to more drugs. I mean, maybe that's a terrible analogy, but you always wanted more. So the digital dial-up service, faster than analog modems. That's what the ISDN was. Now, in my neighborhood in Davie, Florida, Bell South, which today is AT&T, they decided that they were going to, and we were thinking this was unbelievable. It was what we call, and they were just putting it in our neighborhood and maybe some other locations, but this had to be very, how would you say, wasn't over the air, so it had to have a direct connection. So they went to what they called DSL, and that was digital subscriber line, and it ranged from 128 kps up to several MPBS or MIPS. Early forms offered higher speeds over standard telephone lines, but were not technically modems. A lot of the DSL coming into your home, in the neighborhood, we had a box that would have from my home a board, and the connection would go from there. But mainly, it was still over the telephone line or the copper telephone lines. So as I remember, we got up to 1.5 MIPS, which was pretty cool, especially since you're coming from 56 kps. So it was quite an improvement. And I remember getting a router that I could hook up to computers, and we both could be on the internet, which was pretty, how would you say, creative back then. And in fact, a lot of times the person providing the service would say, no, you can't do that. You're pulling two speed connections, and it's going to slow it down for everybody else. Now, it's not that all your neighbors were doing, so you didn't know. And all I know that it was pretty good. The speeds above that were achieved using modulation techniques that evolved over time, allowing for higher throughput on the same analog telephone lines. So, the thing that was great was, and again, this is showing an example of the dish I had outside on the home, where this was the direct PC, which helped a little bit, I guess, in speed, where again, the modem would be sending up a request that I'd say, okay, I want to go to whatever. And again, the signal would go up via modem, and then the actual whatever I asked for would come down with the satellite, obviously in space, down to this satellite dish. In theory, it sounded like a great idea, but it just, a lot of times it just wasn't working. And I was trying to get, again, more speed. It's just weird. So, just as we progress from there and where we are today, it's just unbelievably better. And we keep taking each step, and we are always looking for more speed. Just a point of my own reference, when I was, because we came from Davie, when I had, and they were able to get, what we consider MIPS, million bits per second, which you're kidding me. But when my first real, where you'd say, hey, this is fast, was a Comcast connection that was 105 MIPS. So that's 105 million bits per second. And that was very acceptable. And you could watch TV, you could watch, things that you could never watch before. And you got into where some of the services that you, like some movies you could watch, but and nothing like it is today. I didn't progress because, again, I had direct TV, that's satellite dish and television. I had that for a good long time, and that was pretty good. You had the small dishes. And in fact, just another quick aside, I also, before this, I had a 10-foot dish in my backyard. And, a lot of people didn't like that because they're saying, oh, that's ugly. And yeah, I had to buy a cover for it and what have you. But what you were doing is you were connecting from that dish to, satellites that circling the world. And you'd have different services on different satellites. So if you wanted to watch Tech TV, for example, was one I really enjoyed, you would have to go to GL4. If you wanted to watch CNN, you would go to, another actual satellite connection. And you paid for the service. Of course, as usual, people cheated. But it still was good. And then, we, went into satellite TV, which was very good. And we went from there where I didn't switch, because again, the internet services coming into most homes was okay, but, kind of iffy sometimes. I switched over, and this isn't too long ago. I went and canceled my DirecTV or my Dish Network subscription and just went with streaming. Now, one, and I don't even have this in the presentation, but just the last thing I'll say is we had, and one good device, and I still use them today, are the Rokus. They they connect into your internet service, and you have on the service anything you want to watch that's available. And I remember at the time in 2019, I'm like, are things fast enough? Are things reliable enough to have it where I can, cancel my, and I think the last service I had was Dish Network. And it was good. And things progressed. Now, I know one point that we kept getting into with Comcast was they didn't want to give you, customer, all the bandwidth, as we call it. So they might say, okay, you've watched programs and you only have 20 terabytes of available bandwidth, meaning that watching a show, you would basically go up and, they'd say, hey, you've used your allotment for the month, and we're going to charge you extra for every terabyte that you use. Well, luckily, we progressed beyond that. And I have so many of these wonderful technology pioneering examples that, again, hopefully I can share with you, and hopefully you enjoy it. And please, I know a lot of this you'd say, wow, I wasn't even born back then. And I know, I was born in 1949. We didn't have much of anything. We didn't even, as I mentioned before, we didn't have color TV. Yes, in the late 50s, we had TV, but it was black and white, and there's probably only one channel. What we went through, but we didn't know any better because it was kind of moving things forward. Now, none of us in anything that we do today, we do not want to go backwards. I get it. But sometimes you got to be a little content with what you have. And that's probably what we would say is what we're doing. So anyway, I want to thank you. And hopefully you're learning some of the stuff I'm relearning. And that's when, thank goodness, AI, this morning before I started putting this together, I said, okay, give me a list of all the modem speeds. Because, yes, I remember my very first one was that 300 BPS, bits per second. But that was so technically small signal that all you're going to get is text. So you might say, let's say with the source of CompuServe, I want you to show me, not even show me, just what's this and this and this, and it would just type back to you what you asked. And again, at that time, we were like, wow, this is great. I can learn things I don't know by connecting to another computer miles and miles away. And, we all want to learn things. So here we are. But today, and every generation you get into better. And I got to be honest, the biggest thing in my life, and I'm glad now that they're progressing with AI. Yes, AI, and I use it as a tool to study, to learn, put my facts together. I technically don't use AI I don't actually, for nefarious issues, like hacking this or hacking that or whatever. You try to make sure that you're a good citizen. But anyway, thank you. And hopefully we'll have something exciting tomorrow. Anyway, take care. Thank you again for being here. Jim Whitehead.